got one going. See if the second chat does it. I thought I fixed it, but I'm starting to think that that's maybe not true. Just a second, guys. Nope, it's definitely not fixed. Okay, let me just get rid of this and then I'll be... Man, that is super stupid. Okay, so we are... let me know in the chat about the audio too, because my meters are weird and I don't know why. But yeah, tonight we're getting into chapter 2 of book 2. The first book was the theory of magic after a fashion, scientific illuminism version of magic, which is not superstitious and very much grounded in science and is just as real as me and you. So yeah, equilibrium is the basis of our work. It's the basis of the universe. The universe is generated by the interplay of opposites. And this is a sort of foundational understanding that gives rise to all sorts of insight and knowledge when it's really properly understood, the importance of it, the magnitude of it. It can allow us to understand profound mysteries that cause tremendous confusion in almost everyone, I would imagine. For example, the necessity of the existence of evil can be understood through understanding the law of necessity and equilibrium. Also, I want to mention before we get started, I think it was 2 nights ago, I did a stream on the awakening versus the totalitarian state that's sort of taking root, has been taking root really for decades. And I really hyped it up, and then I was like really unfocused and weird, and I felt really weird, and I had no idea why. It turns out I had either E. coli or Giardia or some kind of terrible amoeba or something. I woke up the next day like burning my whole body, like body aches and nausea. It was absolutely terrible. So that's what happened. I was actually coming down with a pretty serious illness, and I managed to kill it. I'm still a little bit off tonight, but I think we'll be fine. Point being, I'm going to revisit that subject again in a few days because I had a plan, and it was really strange. As soon as I went live, I felt it, but not a minute before, and it just kind of messed the stream up. So try to catch that. All right, let me check in with the chat and see if that chat is no longer alive. Okay, I don't see anything about the audio, so I'm going to assume it's good, and we'll jump right in. I'm sure this is going to be fantastic. Every single chapter of this book has been pretty fantastic. Actually, also, before we get into this, I want to update you guys a little bit on this Calabi, I guess is the proper way to say it, Calabi Yao manifolds. Basically, I just had this intuition that started with the thought that if the universe is indeed a mind, being that there is a mechanism behind everything, there's going to have to be some kind of conversion layer in the quantum world that transcribes the thoughts of the universal mind into actual things. And so I thought I'm going to still call them Calabi because I like it better. Calabi Yao manifolds, which I had no idea what they were like the neurons that were giving like form and structure to things. And I looked it up and found out that that was actually true. And I also intuited that Fourier transform and Euler formula were essential components, and that turned out to be correct. And so a paper was just published, I think just a few days ago, not more than a few weeks. And this, I did a stream where I showed all the conversations with the AI months ago, and it was all confirmed exactly the way I laid it out, which is wild. And then this Langland's project paper was published that really just blew my mind. And it's just a technical description of this idea that I had. Part of it was also, I've always said the universe is, the creation process is basically a matter of replication by reflection. And it turns out that there are these things called D-brains on Calabi-Yau manifolds. And brain, right? I said they were the neurons of the universal mind. There are brains in them, literally brains. And anyways, basically mirror symmetry is the scientific term for this process of replication by reflection. So I just want to encourage everybody to watch out for the videos on that subject, because the deeper I dig, the more it looks like this concept that I sort of intuited of a universal mind sort of transform, in the quantum world was exactly on point. And it's really not that remarkable in a way. And I'm not just trying to be humble there, it's just, to me, it seems to be true that the philosopher's stone is reason, as Éliphas Lévi said a few chapters back. And really, it doesn't require a quantum physicist to put this together. All that is needed is a basic understanding of, harmonic analysis and, just sort of a generalized layman's knowledge of these things is really enough to construct this idea. So, anyways, we're going to get into all that later in a video dedicated to it. Chapter 2, Magical Equilibrium. Equilibrium is the consequence of two forces. If two forces are absolute and invariably equal, the equilibrium will be immobility, and therefore the negation of life. Movement is the result of an alternate preponderance. The impulsion given to one of the sides of the balance necessarily determines the motion of the other. These thus contraries act on one another throughout all nature by correspondence and analogical connection. All life is composed of an aspiration and a respiration. Creation is the assumption of a shadow to serve as a bound to light, of a void to serve as space for the plenitude, of a passive, fructified principle to sustain and realize the power of the active generating principle. All nature is bisexual, and the movement which produces the appearances of death and life is a continual generation. God loves the void which he made in order to fill it. Science loves the ignorance which it enlightens. Strength loves the weakness which it supports. Good loves the apparent evil which glorifies it. Day is desirous of night and pursues it unceasingly around the world. Love is at once a thirst and a plenitude which must diffuse itself. He who gives receives, and he who receives gives. Movement is a continual interchange. To know the law of this change, to be acquainted with the alternative or simultaneous proportion of these forces, is to possess the first principles of the great magical arcanum, which constitutes true human divinity. Scientifically, we can appreciate the various manifestations of the universal movement through electric or magnetic phenomena. Electrical apparatuses, above all, materially and positively reveal the affinities and antipathies of certain substances. The marriage of copper with zinc, the action of all metals in the galvanic pile, are perpetual and unmistakable revelations. Let physicists seek and find out. Ever will the Kabbalists explain the discoveries of science. And that is remarkably true. I've talked about this a few times, but if Roger Penrose, who has a history of being correct about things that he was laughed at when he first suggested them, is correct, the universe begins as light and it ends as light, because eventually every particle will collide with its anti-particle and annihilate itself, and what is left behind is photons. And that's exactly the process that the Kabbalah describes. And not only that, I did this in an older video. If you guys look at for the conversations with AI, it's one of those. I basically made a diagram of the correlations between the phases that physicists describe in creation and how those correspond to the sephirot of the tree of life. It's pretty remarkable. And if that theory of Penrose's, the CCC theory, is correct, Éliphas Lévi predicted that. He said that the tree of life of the Kabbalists will be the first and most important instance of like modern people being forced to recognize that the Kabbalah anticipated the discoveries of science. The human body is subject, like the earth, to a dual law. It attracts and it radiates. It is magnetized by an androgen magnetism and reacts on the two powers of the soul, the intellectual and the sensitive, inversely but in proportion to the alternating preponderances of the two sexes in their physical organism. The art of the magnetizer consists wholly in the knowledge and use of this law, to polarize the action and impart to the agent a bisexual and alternated force is the method still unknown and sought vainly for directing the phenomena of magnetism at will. But tact, most experience, and great precision in the interior movements are required to prevent the confusion of the signs of magnetic aspiration with those of respiration. We must also be perfectly acquainted with occult anatomy and the special temperament of the persons on whom we are operating. Bad faith and bad will in subjects constitute the gravest hindrance in the direction of magnetism. One of the things that he's alluding to here is the idea that there is a boomerang effect when you send your will out. So you draw to yourself things based on more than just your intention. An example of that, like if you're ill-prepared to deal with the recoil. I was once walking down the street in Vilcabamba, Ecuador, and I ran into a shaman that I had been working with for years. I had been hanging out with my current partner and this other girl, but there was nothing going on with any of us at that point. He said, I ran into this guy, I don't recall his name, and he said that you have two girlfriends. And I said, well, I wish he would stop talking. The next day, I went to ceremony at the shaman's house, and the guy that said this to him was the first person I ran into. And I was like, hey, man, what's up? You know, and he goes, he couldn't talk. And I thought something like, you know, profane the air with your lies, I'll snatch the wind from your throat, bud, you know. And the next day, I came down with strep throat and couldn't talk. So, you know, you have to, it's that old thing of like, be careful what you wish for. You know, the currents have to be completely refined. Also, you've probably heard me talk about when I willed the universe to send me a wife with exactly certain characteristics and parents with certain characteristics, willing to do certain things, and I got exactly that. But I didn't specify her character and a lot of other details that were extremely important. I didn't really expect it to happen either, but I learned that being careful what you wish for doesn't really mean that, you know, you don't want to wish for things and then actually get them because it's going to be bad. But when you are engineering your current, you know, when you're generating your current, it has to be highly specific, highly refined. The information must be precise, you know. When you, I hate to date myself, but when you put a CD in a CD player, if it doesn't have quite the right information in it, it's not going to sound like Led Zeppelin or Justin Bieber or whatever it is that you're playing. It's going to be indistinguishable. It has to be exactly, specifically that information in order for it to recreate the recording, you know. So that's kind of what we're getting into here, how to create the balance in your will so that you do not blow yourself up in various regretful manners. Women, above all, who are essentially and invariably actresses, who take pleasure in impressing others so that they may impress themselves, are themselves the first to be deceived when playing their neurotio melodramas, are the true black magic of magnetism. Women are the true black magic of magnetism? Damn, Éliphas. Calm down, bro. So is it forever possible that magnetizers who are uninitiated in the supreme secrets and unassisted by the lights of the Kabbalah should govern this refractory and fugitive element? To be master of woman, we must distract and deceive her skillfully by allowing her to suppose that it is she who is deceiving us. God damn, man. That's not healthy advice, is it? This advice, which we offer chiefly to magnetizing physicians, might also find its place in application in conjugal polity. Damn, dude. And that was an advice on manipulating women for the purpose of seduction, by the way, in case you didn't catch it. Man can produce two breathings at his pleasure, one warm and the other cold. He can also project either the active or passive light at will, but he must require the consciousness of this power by habitually dwelling thereon. The same manual gesture may alternately aspire and respire, what we are accustomed to call the fluid, and the magnetizer will himself be warned of the results of his intention by an alternative sensation of warmth and cold in the hand or in both hands when both are being used, which sensation the subject should experience at the same time, but in a contrary sense, that is, with a wholly opposed alternative. So, this is why I always recommend that people do both versions of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, invoking, which is passive, in the morning, and banishing at night. And in order to experience both at once, like he's saying, the middle pillar ritual after the invoking and the banishing. And this is also, it serves a double purpose. There's more to it than just cleaning out your closet and defining your microcosm and its constituents, right? You're also sort of conditioning yourself to be aware of both of these energies and to accustom yourself to being in balance and being a conduit for mediating them both, because that's really what the magician is as the middle pillar, the mediator of these two opposing forces. Let me check in with the chat again, because I always get paranoid that something has gone wrong with the technicals, and oftentimes it turns out to be true. Okay, some kind of based right-wing spiritual anti-feminist truth. Yeah, well, the thing is, he was kind of tongue-in-cheek talking about the magnetic polarities as much as he was, actual mortal women. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron, because we're demonetized, and so that is my only source of recompense for my efforts. Also, follow me on Substack, because I am able to speak freely there. And I have just nearly completed my first blog post that's really long and in-depth, and I'm really happy about it. And then I'm going to start posting videos there where I'll be able to say all the stuff that I haven't been able to say on YouTube. So that's exciting. The pentagram, or sign of the microcosms, represents microcosmos. Jesus, I didn't know that was coming. I really didn't. See what I mean about this stuff? The pentagram, or sign of the microcosmos, represents, among other magical mysteries, the double sympathy of the human extremities with each other and with the circulation of the astral light in the human body. Thus, when a man is represented in the star of the pentagram, as may be seen in the occult philosophy of Agrippa, it should be observed that the head corresponds in masculine sympathy with the right foot and in feminine sympathy with the left foot. That the right hand corresponds in the same way with the left hand and left foot and reciprocally of the other hand. This must be borne in mind when making magnetic passes. If we seek to govern the whole organism and bind all members by their proper chains of analogy and natural sympathy. The same knowledge is necessary for the use of the pentagram in the conjuration of spirits and the evocation of errant spirits in the astral light, vulgarly called necromancy, as we shall explain in the 5th chapter of this ritual. You know, and if you think about this, the way that the right and left hemispheres of the brain govern different things, and those things correspond to the masculine and feminine nature, you know, and the brain has as its mechanism of operation electromagnetic energy. And so, you know, it definitely could be argued, especially in light of the fact that we now know that electrical fields can hold memory, and that cognition definitely, huh? Yeah, because if we have plants that can count and have memory, that's, you know, non-neural field-based cognition. So, anyways, it could be argued that the reason the brain has those correspondences is due to the current of electromagnetic energy and not something that is inherently a property of the brain. So, that's dope. But it is well to observe here that every action promotes a reaction, and that in magnetizing others or influencing them magically, we establish between them and ourselves a current of contrary but analogous influence, which may subject us to them instead of subjecting them to us, as happens frequently enough in those operations which have the sympathy of love for their object. Hence, it is highly essential to be on our defense while we are attacking. Yeah, remember what I said about getting strep throat? Because I said I wish that dude would stop talking and he lost his voice, and then I got strep throat the next day. Better pay attention. The magical androgen depicted in the frontispiece of the ritual has solve inscribed upon the right and coagula on the left arm, which corresponds to the symbolical figure of the architects of the Second Temple, who bore their sword in one hand and their trowel in the other. While building, they had also to defend their work and disperse their enemies. Nature herself does likewise, destroying and regenerating at the same time. Now, according to the allegory of Duchantal, magical calendar, man, that is to say, the initiate, is the ape of nature, who confines him by a chain but makes him act unceasingly, imitating the proceedings and works of his divine mistress and imperishable model. The alternate use of contrary forces, warmth after cold, mildness after severity, love after anger, etc., is the secret of perpetual motion and the permanence of power. Coquettes feel this instinctively, and hence they make their admirers pass from hope to fear, joy to despondency. What are coquettes? To operate always on the same side and in the same manner is to overweight one plate of the balance, and the complete destruction of equilibrium is the speedy result. Continual caressing begets satiety, disgust, and antipathy, just as constant coldness and severity in the long run alienate and discourage affection. An unvarying and ardent fire in alchemy calcifies, I would think, the first matter, and not seldom explodes the hermetic vessel. The heat of lime and mineral manure must be substituted at regular intervals for the heat of flame. And so also in magic. The works of wrath or severity must be tempered by those of beneficence and love. And if the will of the operator be always at the same tension and directed along the same line, great weariness will ensue, together with a species of moral impotence. That is a great way of putting that, moral impotence. And that is really what happens when people adopt the sort of pop culture spirituality narrative, I guess, and conform to it. All light and love, and they don't want to listen to Tool because it sounds too angry or whatever, you know, and They're hypersensitive to everything dark, and you know, they don't learn anything about the other side of the coin. And what you notice is that these people tend to lack actual depth and substance, and they are generally completely at the will of the wind. You know, they're definitely not capable of leadership or influence or any real sort of impactful effect in accordance with their supposed metaphysical disposition. You know, the real prophet's head rises above the heavens and feet drag below the hells. That's basically what he's kind of getting at here. To strive continually against nature in order to her rule and conquest is to risk reason and life. Paracelsus dared to do so, but even in the warfare itself, he employed equilibrated forces and opposed the intoxication of wine to that of intelligence. So he drank, you know, when he was done thinking. So was Paracelsus a man of inspiration and miracles, yet his life was exhausted by this devouring activity. Or rather, its vestment was rapidly rent and worn out. But men like Paracelsus can use and abuse fearlessly. They well know that they can no more die than grow old here below. That is another aspect of this that I've always felt is super important. You know, this kind of knowledge. Although certainty is not really possible in this arena, it sort of is, you know, but only the madman is absolutely certain. You can have very strong suspicions, but if you're going to be honest with yourself, which is necessary if you're truly in pursuit of truth, you know, and not just comforting illusions. At any rate, you kind of arrive at the opinion that we are immortal in some sense. You know, whether reincarnation is literal or not, the idea that we are part of a conscious continuum, you know, some sort of field-based intelligence, and that our energy is recycled into other forms of awareness, you know, eternally. It's a little bit difficult to be really afraid. This is one of the reasons that illuminated people are such a danger to the status quo and to the establishment and the overlords, you know, because if you're not really afraid of death, then it's kind of hard to scare you, you know, and you're gonna really want to live your life. You're not gonna be concerned as much with security and uniformity and mundanity. You know, you're going to have balls and you're going to use them, and that doesn't result in a docile, fearful, manageable entity. You know, this is a recipe for an iconoclast warrior in the right context, you know, and that's one of the reasons the pop culture version of this stuff kind of emphasizes making people docile pussies, basically, because it's the only way that they can counteract the emergence of the full expression of an illuminated mind. Nothing induces us towards joy so effectually as sorrow. Nothing is nearer to sorrow than joy. Hence, the uninstructed operator is astounded by attaining the very opposite of his proposed results, because he does not know how to cross or alternate his action. He seeks to bewitch his enemy, and himself becomes ill and miserable. He desires to make himself loved, and he consumes himself for women who deride him. He endeavors to make gold, and he exhausts all of his resources. His torture is that of Tantalus eternally. Ever does the water flow back when he stoops down to drink. The ancients and their symbols and magical operations multiplied the signs of the duods so that its law of equilibrium might be remembered. In their evocations, they invariably constructed two altars and immolated two victims, one white and one black. The operator, whether male or female, holding a sword in one hand and a wand in the other, had one foot shod and the other bared. At the same time, either one or three persons were required for magical works, because the duad would be immobility or death in the absence of the equilibrating motor. Whenever three or more are gathered in my name, isn't that what it says? And when a man and a woman participated in the ceremony, the operator was either a virgin, a hermaphrodite, or a child. I shall be asked whether the eccentricity of these rites is arbitrary and whether its one end is the exercise of the will by the mere multiplication of difficulties in magical work. I answer that in magic there's nothing arbitrary because everything is ruled and predetermined by the one and universal dogma of Hermes, that of analogy in the three worlds. Each sign corresponds to an idea, and to the special form of an idea, each act expresses a volition corresponding to a thought and formulates the analogies of that thought and that will. The rites are therefore prearranged by the science itself. The uninstructed person who is not acquainted with the three powers is subject to their mysterious fascination. The sage understands those powers and makes them the instrument of his will. But when they are accomplished with exactitude and faith, they are never ineffectual. All magical instruments must be duplicated. There must be 2 swords, 2 wands, 2 cups, 2 chafing dishes, 2 pantacles, and 2 lamps. 2 vestments must be worn, one over the other, and there must be of contrary colors, a rule still followed by Catholic priests, and either no metal or 2 at the least must be worn. The crowns of laurel, rue, mugwort, or vervain must in like manner be double. One of them is used in evocations while the other is burnt. The crackling which it makes and the curls of the smoke which it produces being observed like an augury. Nor is the observance vain, for in the magical work all the instruments of art are magnetized by the operator. The air is charged with his perfumes, the fire which he has consecrated is subject to his will, the forces of nature seem to hear and answer him. He reads in all forms and modifications and complements of his thought. He perceives the water agitated and as it were bubbling of itself, the fire blazing up or extinguishing suddenly, the leaves of the garlands rustling, the magical rod moving spontaneously, and strange unknown voices passing through the air. It was in such evocations that Julian beheld the beloved phantoms of his dethroned gods and was appalled at their decrepitude and pallor. So, how did he put this? The fire which he has consecrated is subject to his will. The forces of nature seem to hear and answer him. He reads in all forms the modifications and complements of his thought. That last bit is really important, and it's also one of the biggest difficulties in this process of being awake and having a dialogue with the universe, because we have so many subconscious influences. We have egoic desires, all of these things that have the potential to delude and confuse and derail reality, our relationship with reality. And this is why, if you think about how this whole will thing is described as being magnetic, this is why the first task of the magician is to find his true will and focus his identity and purpose on it entirely and completely and without reservation and with 10 toes in when you're standing on business. You know what I mean? Because if you have that kind of focus and direction and your magnetism is locked onto due north, then even if you misread signs, symbols, hints, and clues, then they're still going to be turned to your purpose. And it's really only when that dedication is either ill-founded or incomplete that any of these things, like misreading a synchronicity or seeing an omen where there's just a purely chaotic coincidence, is problematic. Sorry, I saw a bug and lost my train of thought for a second there. But yeah, the magnetic connection to your true will is absolute. Then when you read in all forms and modifications and complements of your thoughts, then they won't be problematic under any circumstances. I am aware that Christianity has forever suppressed ceremonial magic and that it severely prescribes the evocations and sacrifices of the old world. It is not, therefore, our intention to give a new ground for their existence by revealing the antique mysteries after the lapse of so many centuries. Even in this very order of phenomena, our experiences have been scholarly researches and nothing more. We have confirmed facts that we might appreciate causes, and it has never been our pretension to restore rights which are forever destroyed. The orthodoxy of Israel, that religion which is so rational, so divine, and so ill-known, condemns no less than Christianity the mysteries of ceremonial magic. From the standpoint of the tribe of Levi, the exercise of transcendent magic must be considered as a usurpation of the priesthood, and the same reason has caused the prescription of operative magic by every official cultist. To demonstrate the natural foundation of the marvelous and to produce it at will is to annihilate for the vulgar mind that conclusive evidence from miracles which is claimed by each religion as its exclusive property and its final argument. Respect for established religions, but room also for science. We have passed, thank God, the days of inquisitions and pyres. Unhappy men of learning are no longer murdered for the faith of a few distraught fanatics or hysterical girls. For the rest, let it be clearly understood that our undertaking is concerned with studies of the curious and not with an impossible propaganda. Those who may blame us for daring to term ourselves magicians have nothing to fear from the example, it being wholly improbable that they will ever become sorcerers. That's the entire purpose of the priesthood. Someone at some point thought, let's disconnect the individual from their sovereign identity through their connection to divinity and designate it to individuals that are completely under our control. This is also what presidents are, by the way. And that's really the point of this whole new paradigm is, the revelations of Michael Levin and the possibilities of quantum consciousness and non-neural cognition and all this stuff basically are the proofs that there is a sort of ubiquitous integrated divinity. You can use the word intelligence if you prefer. But once that reality escapes the lab and penetrates into popular culture, then the intermediary is no longer necessary. And we are right on the brink of that. What just happened? Yeah. Are we going into chapter 3? The Triangle of Pentacles. Let me check in with the chat and see what's up with you guys. I still have this one open and I'm not using it. All right, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this Triangle of Pentacles. I just realized I'm hungry and there's no snacks around. But I think I can manage maybe some water. Yeah, that's better. I have no idea what this is about, so let's just do it. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. There are options to chat or support the channel in the chat and in every video description as well. Chapter 3, the Triangle of Pentacles. Should I have said more about I feel like he said everything that needs said about that interplay of opposites, equilibrium, balance. The abbot Trithemius, who in magic was the master of Cornelius Agrippa, explains in his stenography the secret of conjurations and evocations after a very natural and philosophical manner, though possibly for that very reason too simply and too easily. He tells us that to evoke a spirit is to enter into the dominant thought of that spirit, And if we raise ourselves morally higher along the same line, we shall draw the spirit away with us, and it will certainly serve us. To conjure is to oppose the resistance of a current and a chain to an isolated spirit. I know where this is going. Cum jurare, to swear together, that is, to make a common act of faith. The greater the strength and enthusiasm of this faith, the more efficacious is the conjuration. This is why newborn Christianity silenced the oracles. It only possessed inspiration. It only force. Later on, when St. Peter grew old, that is, when the world believed that it had a legal case against the papacy, the spirit of prophecy came to replace the oracles. Savonarola, Joaquin of Flores, John Hus, and so many others by turns influenced the minds of men and interpreted by lamentations and menaces the secret anxieties and rebellions of all hearts. I had a thought. Let me see. Okay, yeah. When he was talking about binding ourselves to the spirit, basically, Aleister Crowley once said that the spirits of the Goetia are not objectively real. They're actually just parts of the mind. And there are a couple of parts to this. When the magician summons a spirit that he wishes to serve him, when he says, you are bound by the Most High God to do as I say, what he's really saying is the law of entrainment dictates that things that vibrate at a lower, oscillation have to entrain with the higher, right? So this demon is compelled by God, the laws of nature, to act in congruence with his will, right? And since energy cannot be destroyed but only transformed, our process of constraining a demon to our will is alchemical transmutation in a sense. And what you are doing is turning this one modality into a different version of itself, right? It's going to be something of the same nature. It's opposite ends of the same spectrum. So if it is a demon of lust, you are going to transmute it into a positive creative force. If it is a demon of greed, then you will transmute it into or how would you say this? Let's just say positive ambition, a productive, healthy type of ambition. So, yeah, that's an important note there. We may act individually when evoking a spirit, but to conjure, we must speak in the name of a circle or an association. This is the significance of the hieroglyphical circle traced around the magus who is operating, and out of which he must not pass unless he wishes at the same moment to be stripped of all of his power. Let us grapple at this point with the vital and palmary question, whether the real evocation and real conjuration of spirits are things possible, and whether such possibility can be scientifically demonstrated. To the first part of the question, it may be replied out of hand that everything which is not an evident impossibility can and must be admitted as provisionally possible. Everything that can exist does exist. As to the second part, we affirm that in virtue of the great magical dogma of the hierarchy and of universal analogy, the Kabbalistic possibility of real evocations can be demonstrated concerning the phenomenal reality consequent upon magical operations accomplished with sincerity. This is a matter of experience. As already described, we have established it in our own persons, and by means of this ritual, we shall place our readers in a position to renew and confirm our experience. Something he said about the circle, it's really important to notice when things are absolutely ubiquitous in disparate cultures, right? So the Druids cast a circle, the Ayahuasquero cast a circle, the San Pedro shaman, the Huachumero, cast a circle, the Freemason cast a circle, the Hermetic adept cast a circle, and it represents basically the same thing in every single tradition, which is that the parameters of it define the area inside of which the magician can control the energy. And then we have things like, the number 4 as a number of stability. The foundation is then created, which is almost always the 4 directions, sometimes also the 4 elements, sometimes also 4 archangels. And by the way, this is how real numerology works. A lot of numerological systems seem to me to just be like people have made up things that they want them to symbolize or something. To me, the real numerology is numerology where you can see the functionality of it. You can see the correspondence of this number with the allegorical meaning. It's not allegorical, it's functional. So, nothing in nature perishes. Whatsoever has lived goes on living always under new forms, but even the anterior forms are not destroyed, since they persist in our memory. Do we not still see in imagination the child we once knew, though now he is an old man? And this is, of course, literally true if it's indeed a fact that information is preserved at the quantum level, which is the majority, I think, of physicists agree that that's the case. The very traces which we believe to be effaced from our memory are not in reality blotted out, for a fortuitous circumstance may evoke and recall them. But after what manner do we see them? As we have already said, it is in the astral light, which transmits them to our brain by the mechanism of the nervous system. On the other hand, all forms are proportional and analogical to the idea which has determined them. They are the natural character, the signature of that idea, as the Magi term it, and so, as the idea is actively evoked, the form is realized and bodied forth. Schroepfer, the famous Illuminé of Leipzig, terrified all Germany with his evocations, and his audacity in magical experiments was so great that his reputation became an insupportable burden. He allowed himself to be carried away by the immense current of hallucinations which he had produced. The visions of the world disgusted him with this, and he killed himself. He unalived himself. His story should be a warning to those who are fascinated by ceremonial magic. Nature is not outraged with impunity, and no one can safely play with unknown and incalculable forces. It is this consideration which has led and will ever lead us to withstand the vain curiosity of those who would see in order that they may believe. And we reply to them in the same words as we replied to an eminent Englishman who threatened us with skepticism. You are perfectly within your right in refusing to believe. For our part, it will not make us more discouraged or less convinced. To those who may assure us that they have scrupulously and boldly fulfilled all the rites and that there has been no result, we would recommend that they should stay their hand, as it is possibly a warning of nature, who will not lend herself for them to these anomalous works. But if they persist in their curiosity, they have only to start afresh. So, one of the things that is being alluded to here, because he never really spells shit out, not often exactly, is that there is sort of a record in what people call the Akashic record, or the 0-point field of physics. If all of this information is retained of every moment and every thought, it's such that if you burn a book that has 1,000 pages of print, on the quantum level, every single word is preserved in every moment that it existed, in every position that it ever existed. And so the same would be true of you in any moment having any thought. And so that cumulative record exists in this field. And so what you're doing is sort of activating the shells of the dead. It's almost like a what do they call it when they have like is it a hologram of the stars? It's something like that. So you're not necessarily exactly interacting with the real thing, but it contains all of the information. And it could retain the personality, and you know what I mean? That's what that's about. That's what a spirit is from this point of view. And it's also kind of informed by your perception, though. It's not going to be an absolutely pure representation, because these spirits require the intersection of an active living mind and these old, recordings, basically, in order to be animated. I had a little bit more. Oh, okay. And this is why assumption of God forms is a good thing to learn, because the ritual basically consists of covering the room in colors associated with the entity that you're trying to contact, burning, if it's a solar entity, then burning solar incenses and playing hymn to Ra music and, everything you can do to completely identify with this entity that you're trying to interact with. And that way the contamination of your perceptions and expectations is reduced. The triad, being the foundation of magical doctrine, must necessarily be observed in evocation. So is it the symbolical number of realization and effect. The letter Shin is commonly traced upon Kabbalistic pentacles, which have the fulfillment of a desire for their object. It is also the sign of the scapegoat in mystic Kabbalah, and St. Martin observes that inserted in the incommunicable tetragram, it forms the name of the Redeemer. Oh my God. I didn't know that was in here. So this is wild. The tetragrammaton also represents the four elements, right? Yod, He, Vav, He. And if you descend the letter Shin, which represents spiritual fire, electromagnetism, maybe, into the center of it, it becomes Yoshua, which is Savior. So the four elements are redeemed by spirit, basically. It is this which the mystagogues of the Middle Ages represented in their nocturnal assemblies by the exhibition of a symbolical goat carrying a lighted torch between its horns. In the 15th chapter of the ritual, we shall describe the allegorical forms and strange cultus of this monstrous animal, which represented nature doomed to anathema, but ransomed by the sign of light. The Gnostic agape and pagan priapic orgies, which followed in its honor, sufficiently revealed the moral consequence which the adepts drew from the exhibition. All this will be explained together with the rites decried and now regarded as fabulous of the Great Sabbath and of black magic. Within the grand circle of evocations, a triangle was usually traced, and the side towards which the upper point must be directed as a matter for careful observation. If the spirit were supposed to be from heaven, the operator placed himself at the top and set the altar of fumigations at the bottom. But if the spirit came from the abyss, this method was reversed. Moreover, the sacred symbol of two interlaced triangles forming the six-pointed star, known in magic as the Pantacle or Seal of Solomon, must be worn upon the forehead and the breast and graven in the right hand. Settle down, dude. Graven in the right hand? Independently of these signs, the ancients in their evocations made use of those mystical combinations of divine names which we have reproduced in our doctrine from the Hebrew Kabbalists. The magical triangle of Papan Theosophists was the celebrated abracadabra, to which they attributed extraordinary virtues and represented as follows. Yeah, the first time I ever saw that triangle, I had just gone to the bookstore to pick up one of Crowley's books, and I saw that, and then I went to the record store, and there was an album with that on the cover sitting on that they hadn't shelved yet. It was Dimmu Borgir. It's a trip, man. I bought it for sure. Abracadabra means something like to speak into existence, by the way. The combinations of letters is a key of the pentagram. The initial A is represented 5 and reproduced 30 times. Repeated 5 times and reproduced 30 times, thus giving the elements and numbers of the two following figures. The isolated A represents the unity of the first principle, otherwise the intellectual or active agent. A united to B represents the fertilization of the duad by the monad. R is the sign of the triad because it represents hieroglyphically the emission which results from the union of the two principles. The number 11, which is that of the letters of the word, combines the unity of the initiate with the denary of Pythagoras and the number 66. The added total of all the letters Kabbalistically forms the number 12, which is the square of the triad and consequently the mystic quadrature of the circle. Now notice something. These are all solar numbers. 11 is the sun cycles, and I noticed years ago that our parapsychological capacities and synchronicities and also insights and whatnot, personal insights, self-development kind of stuff, shining the light where we couldn't before because there's more of it in blasts. The solar maxim, it corresponds as the cycle intensifies, all that stuff gets stronger and stronger. And then once once it calms down, that's the time to manifest after this period of solve, basically. It's time to coagula. And so 11 is the number of magical expansion because of those solar cycles. And also 1111 is the number of synchronicity, partly because we are the other 11, right? So 6 is also a solar number, and 6 times 11, 66, and 12, the zodiac, which is the square of the triad and consequently the mystic quadrature of the circle. We may remark in passing that the author of the Apocalypse, the key of the Christian Kabbalah, composed the number of the beast, that is to say, of idolatry, by adding a 6 to the double synary of abracadabra, which gives 18 Kabbalistically, the number attributed in the tarot to the hieroglyphic sign of night and of the profane. The moon, together with the towers, dog, wolf, and crab, a mysterious and obscure number, the Kabbalistic key of which is 9, the number of initiation. On this subject, the sacred Kabbalist says expressly, "He that hath understanding," that is, the key of Kabbalistic numbers, "let him count the number of a beast, for it is the number of a man, and the number of him is 666. And in order to get to the truth, 9 is also the number of truth, because 9 times 9 is 81. 8 plus 1 is 9. It doesn't matter. You multiply anything times 9, reduce it all, it's 9 again. The truth is always the truth. So to get to the fundamental essence of something, first you would get the number of the word or phrase and then multiply it by 9. And if you do this with Jesus Christ, Messiah, and serpent in Hebrew, you get 666, just FYI. It is in fact the decade of Pythagoras multiplied by itself and added to the sum of the triangular pantacle of abracadabra. It is thus the sum of all magic of the ancient world, the entire program of human genius, which the divine genius of the gospel sought to absorb or transplant. These hieroglyphical combinations of letters and numbers belong to the practical part of the Kabbalah, which, from this point of view, is divided from gematria and timera. Timera has to do with rearranging letters within a word or phrase in order to find other phrases that are contained within it, because nothing can express anything that's not in its nature, basically, is the logic there. Let me check in with the chat again, because this has been a minute. How to bring A into B as one? Not sure what you mean. They use the demons through him, black magic. I don't know what the hell that means either. So can someone uninitiated use these spirits, demons, without being aware? I mean, it depends on what you mean there. I'm not a particular believer in violations of will by means of demonic attachment. I feel like if we were really subject to a constant threat of demons, the human race would already be gone, Another element of this is that people that do not believe in demons are never affected by them. There's been like 50 studies over 50 years on every continent almost, and they all came to the same conclusion that, there are entire societies that don't believe in demons, that are pretty much completely atheist. They've never had anything that even remotely looks like a demonic possession, So the simple best protection against demons and parasitic entities is just not to believe in them. It really is that simple, And in all my years of going out on the astral plane as a ritual ceremonial magician, as an ayahuasquero, DMT experiences, whatever. I have never once encountered anything demonic that told me to do anything bad or seemed to want to hurt me. I've met things that were scary, but nothing that seemed overtly evil. And I think one of the things that we have sort of been infected by, and by the way, there are indigenous people that agree with me about this, that they have no concept of like parasitical entities or demons. The law of necessity governs everything. So let's say you're an entity that lives on a plane of pure energy. What are you going to get from hurting someone? Like, where is your diabolical motive coming from? People do it for pleasure. People do it for, and I'm talking physical pleasure. People do it for money. They do it for resources. But what is the motivation for an eternal being of pure consciousness? On their plane, there is no death. You can't break a leg. You're not going to get robbed. None of this shit makes any sense to them even. So I'm not really on board with the whole, demonic thing. I think usually when people talk about having parasitical attachments and problems with demons, they're just weak people that need an excuse for their problems, and that's their scapegoat, the devil, and his minions of evil imaginary things. That's not... And so can an uninitiated person, there is no uninitiated person that is ever going to interface with anything of that nature anyways, and what initiation is something that I think is kind of difficult to explain exactly. I hate to say this out loud because it opens the door to all kinds of problematic behavior. But, for example, in Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, he was a 33rd degree Mason and the commander of the Southern jurisdiction in 1851 or something. And he said some Masons have never entered a lodge, and they have received their initiation on the rays of the sun. So I think people kind of view initiation in a lot of cases as being like permission given by a human to enter into a certain modality. And that's not necessarily true. And it's not even possible. You may have initiation in the sense that you have been accepted, and then you are given access to processes that catalyze changes within the individual that teach them things, So I guess part of the answer is it depends on what you mean by initiation. The hieroglyphical combination of letters and numbers belong to the practical part of the Kabbalah, which from this point of view is divided into gematria and timera. Such calculations, which now seem to us arbitrary or devoid of interest, then belong to the philosophical symbolism of the East and were of the highest importance in the teaching of holy things emanating from the occult sciences. See if I can make this just a little bigger. Yeah, it still fits. The absolute Kabbalistic alphabet, which connected primitive ideas with allegories, allegories with letters, and letters with numbers, was then called the Keys of Solomon. We have already stated that these keys, preserved to our own day, but wholly misconstrued, are nothing else than the game of tarot, the antique allegories of which are remarked and appreciated for the first time in the modern world by the learned archaeologist Kurt de Gebelen. What he just mentioned about how the Hebrew alphabet has like 3 layers of meaning. There's a number, it's a glyph of something, and also a sound, right? When you consider the things that it does Kabbalistically, like the whole pentagram or the tetragrammaton into the pentagrammaton becoming Yoshua and all this, there's a lot of that. And if you consider the fact that each of these things has 3 layers and it still has all these weird triplicate functionalities, it really does suggest that a higher mind was involved in the construction of it. This is the reason why it's used in the occult tradition so much, because it is it is already concressed information. So when you start combining Hebrew characters, you are combining more than just letters. You're combining the numbers, you're combining the symbols that they represent. And if you have trained your mind to think in this way, and to follow these patterns, then whenever you're working with it, you are processing multiple layers, which is a tremendously valuable, I don't want to say skill, because you want it to be an automatic response. There are exercises for doing this that are described in Magick Without Tears by Aleister Crowley that are probably a little bit excessive for most people, but you might have a look and see if you think it's, you don't have to do it for the rest of your life. The idea is that you go overboard with this stuff for a short period, and the more extreme you go, like the rewards commensurate with resistance, right? So the more extreme you go, the shorter the duration is necessary to catalyze the change. Like the slashing your arm when you say something that you pick a word that you say a lot, and then you slash your arm if you say it for, say, 2 weeks or something, to get control over the mind consciously and to train yourself to be mindful all the time. A lot of people tone it down a little bit and just use like a rubber band and just whack, but guarantee you the first method is going to be more efficacious. The double triangle of Solomon is explained by St. John in a remarkable manner. He says there are three which give testimony in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. And there are three which give testimony on earth, the Spirit, the water, and the blood. Thus, St. John agrees with the masters of Hermetic philosophy, because the Bible was based on it, who attribute to their sulfur the name of ether, to their mercury that of philosophical water, and to their salt the qualification of the dragon's blood or menstruum of the earth. Blood or salt corresponds by opposition with the Father, azotic or mercurial water with the Word or Logos, and the ether with the Holy Spirit. But the things of transcendent symbolism can only be righteously understood by the true children of science. That is a little tongue-in-cheek joke there. It's not really a joke, though. I was thinking about this today. The true children of science are polymaths. Because when you have this tunnel vision of specialization, you don't see the forest for the trees. I was looking into how science deals with the Fibonacci sequence manifesting in all these different places without any direct connection, because it implies some sort of blueprint or intelligence or something in nature. And the fact that there's evidence that it manifests over historical periods and in financial markets and everywhere, is a real problem for the current ontological model. And I asked, and the answer I got was something about convergent evolution and mathematical. It doesn't matter. But let's just use convergent evolution, right? So that applies to spiral galaxies and seashells somehow? No, it doesn't, And it occurred to me, like, this is a PhD scientist trying to answer this question, and that's what they come up with this stupid ass, massive hole in it that just cannot be filled by anything, and they don't notice that, and they still let this stupid shit come out of their mouth, and this is supposed to be, one of our most intelligent, you know what I'm saying? Like, what the hell? And that's what happens. Because of this extreme specialization, and also the certain a priori assumptions that science is sort of predicated upon, they cannot see the holistic picture. Right now it's happening to the point where even like Stuart Hameroff doesn't seem to be aware of Michael Levin's work, and and vice versa. And they're super important to each other, And then there are also these adaptations in the evolutionary process that transcend epigenetics as an explanation, that imply a context-aware intelligence that has mitigating agency in the evolutionary process. If the same people were aware of all of these things, it paints a very clear picture. But if you're highly specialized and you only see the one thing, it doesn't mean nearly as much. And that's what being an adept and being a true child of science. That's what he means by that, because we're looking at everything all at once, not staring down a single lane and thinking that somehow you're not even gonna learn about the thing in the single lane sufficiently without. Is there a polymathery? Is that a word? How do you say having the condition of polymathing. You know, you're a poly. It's like polyamory. There's got to be a way to say it, but you know what I mean. The threefold repetition of names with varied intonations was united to triangular combinations in magical siggity ceremonies. The magic rod was frequently surmounted with a small magnetized fork, which Paracelsus replaced by the trident represented below. This trident is a pantacle expressing the synthesis of the triad in the monad, thus completing the sacred tetrad. He ascribed to this figure all the virtues which Kabbalistic Hebrews attribute to the name of Jehovah, and the thaumaturgic properties of the abracadabra used by the Hierophants of Alexandria. Let us here recognize that it is a pantacle, and consequently a concrete and an absolute sign of an entire doctrine, which has been that of an immense magnetic circle, not only for ancient philosophers, but also for adepts of the Middle Ages. The restoration in our own day of its original value by the comprehension of its mysteries, might not that also restore all its miraculous virtue and all its power against human diseases? The old sorceresses, when they spent the night at the meeting place of 3 crossroads, yelled 3 times in honor of the triple Hecate. All these figures, all these dispositions of numbers and of characters are, as we have already said, so many instruments for the education of the will, by fixing and determining its habits. They serve furthermore to conjoin all the powers of the human soul in action, and to increase the creative force of the imagination. It is the gymnastics of thought and training for realization. So the effect of these practices is infallible, like nature, when they are fulfilled with absolute confidence and indomitable perseverance. The Grand Master tells us that faith could transplant trees into the sea and remove mountains. Even a superstitious and insensate practice is efficacious because it is a realization of the will. Hence, a prayer is more powerful if we go to church and say it than if we are said at home, and it will work miracles if we fare to a famous sanctuary for the purpose. In other words, to one which is strongly magnetized by the enormous number of its frequenters, traversing 200 or 300 leagues with bare feet and asking alms by the way. So what he's saying is, when people constantly go to a place and they're like, holy, 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 there's an imprint there, you know, and this magnetizes our ability to engage with this layer of quantum reality. And that is definitely a fact, because when I really went through my Chapel Perilous period, I was in Durango, Colorado, where there were, you know, caves with spirals drawn by Anasazi everywhere. And, you know, it was just clearly, obviously, and truly a holy place for a lot of different people over thousands of years. And even to the extent that for some reason the mountain above the town was called Purgatory. The river that ran down from that mountain was called the River of Lost Souls. The river where you turned onto Highway 666, there was a mountain called Hesperus, which is Greek for morning star. You know, like the place was crazy. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I was so able to tap into, not to mention there are crystals everywhere, you know, all through the mountains. And men laugh at the simple woman who denies herself a pennyworth of milk in the morning when she may carry a penny taper to burn on the magic triangle in a chapel. But they who laugh are ignorant, and the simple woman does not pay too dearly for what she thus purchases of resignation and of courage. Great minds with great pride pass by, shrugging their shoulders. They rise up against superstition with a din which shakes the world, and what happens? The towers of the great minds topple over, and their ruins revert to the providers and purchasers of penny tapers, who are content to hear it everywhere proclaimed that their reign is forever ended, provided that they rule always. Basically, you know, what he's saying there is that we see what these abject materialists have done, and they are destroying themselves and eating themselves alive. Their culture has become vapid and empty and selfish and evil, and it is unsustainable, and they are going down fast and hard. And people like myself that are in tune with this kind of frequency are like in the middle of nowhere in Peru and other places that, you know, we're not going to get taken down. And, you know, warm places with food that grows wild, and you know what I mean? And don't worry, I'm not necessarily ragging on you if you haven't done this yet, but you're gonna if you're really one of those people. And every time this is what happens. When Rome fell, I guarantee you all the magicians and whatnot got the hell out of Dodge, and then they go and set things back up. You know, what we're hoping though is that this time the transition can result in an integration instead of just another revolution of a wheel or a flip of a coin from one side to the other, because that's not working. The great religions have never had more than one serious rival, and this rival is Magick. Magic produced the occult associations which brought about the revolution termed the Renaissance. But it has been the doom of the human mind, blinded by insensate passions, to realize literally the allegorical history of the Hebrew Hercules. By overthrowing the pillars of the temple, it has itself been buried under the ruins. So this is another great example of, like, let's say, what were their names? John Dee and Edward Kelly. You know, they allowed their abilities to be commissioned by Queen Elizabeth, I think. And so another argument in favor of magic: how did the British Empire become the biggest, most powerful empire in human history when it was guided by magicians if magic is stupid? You know, that's kind of a difficult thing to to get around. I mean, I guess it's possible that if your advisors are just superstitious morons, you could still do that, but it doesn't seem likely. In another sense, if those two guys allowed their skills to contribute to that, and they defrauded the divine capacities with which they were entrusted, and then they were reincarnated now in the midst of the fucking consequences of letting these assholes get too powerful. You know what I mean? It's I hope they learned their lesson. And that's kind of what he's saying. It produced the occult associations, which brought about the revolution termed the Renaissance, but it has been the doom of human mind, blinded by insensate passions, to realize literally the allegorical history of the Hebrew Hercules. By overthrowing the pillars of the temple, it has itself been buried under the ruins. The Masonic associations of the present time are no less ignorant of the high meaning of their symbols than are the rabbins of the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar upon the ascending scale of the 3 degrees, with the transverse progression from right to left and from left to right of the Kabbalistic septenary. The compass of the GA and the square of Solomon have become the gross and material level of unintelligent Jacobinism, realized by a steel triangle. This obtains both for heaven and earth. The initiated divulgers, to whom the illuminated Kazot predicted a violent death, have in our own days exceeded the sin of Adam, having rashly gathered the fruits of the tree of knowledge, which they did not know how to use for their nourishment, and they have cast it to the beasts and reptiles of the earth. So was the reign of superstition inaugurated, and it must persist until the period when true religions shall be again constituted on the eternal foundations of the hierarchy of 3 degrees and the triple power which the hierarchy exercises blindly or providentially in the 3 worlds. Next week, the conjurations of the 4. Let me reconfigure my OBS, stick a wad of coca paste in my mouth, and then if you guys would like to have a little bit of mutual discourse, we can engage therein. Foo. I will teach you how to get in touch with your inner chola, eh? Because I can tell you have lost touch with your inner chola, eh? This comedian that I just found, man, is like my favorite thing lately. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second, because it's actually kind of a trip. And it's actually on topic, weirdly on topic. Really weirdly on topic. Let's do that. Yeah, I guess that's here. Back up. Just back up. Trying to fit a little better in the screen hole. It's not the middle, is it? Oh, there we go. Okay, so I am going to join the chat. Doesn't sound like my audio is a little low. The meters say it is, but everything's maxed out. I don't know why it would be. So, if you guys have any questions or topics that you would like to throw in the chat, I'm all about that. And did I say to please hit the like button, share, subscribe, turn on your bell notifications, consider supporting the channel via Patreon, join my Substack. I do consultations. I teach you this stuff one-on-one. I have never had an unhappy client, to put it mildly, in that regard. There are actually, testimonies on video on the channel here and there. So if that interests you, send me an email. It's better than doing it through Patreon because they take a chunk, kind of a big chunk. And please don't sign up on your Apple phone because Apple keeps the money for 75 days. Like the entire time. So it's just kind of annoying. And they take a chunk too. So you're doubling down on corporate fees and it delays the creator getting it. Apple's stupid. So anyways, I talk a lot about join the Patreon. You get access to private Discord chats and 7 years almost now of premium content and guitar lessons, whatever you want. So I talk a lot about opposites on this channel, right? Because it's everything, really. And how there are higher orders of symmetry or different orders of symmetry if you don't want to give them, qualitative, anyways. Different orders of symmetry, right? So symmetries of form and function and whatnot. I was watching this guy, there's a comedian, and he teaches people how to get in touch with their inner chola. Like he has this white woman that's, kind of just middle-aged, plain, normal white woman. And he's all like, I think the problem is you have lost touch with your inner chola, and he's like telling her, but he said a couple times. And it just triggered this thought that in Canada, the country bordering the north of the United States, they say, hey, buddy, and what you doing, eh? And then the country bordering on the south, they say, what you doing in my barrio, eh? What you doing in my barrio? Or they'll say, what you doing in my barrio, eh, amigo? Eh, buddy, eh, amigo? Eh, buddy, eh, amigo? Symmetry, balance, equilibrium. Eh, buddy? Anyways, let me check in with this. Audio is really low. Yeah, I thought so. Doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it, though. I pumped it way up. Let me see what happens if I do this. Is that better? Or this? Damn, that's too bad because I don't want to discourage anyone from watching this one because it was a good one. Let me see if I can. Hello. It's really touchy. I need to get a new interface. Somebody sent me one, and it's great, but it only works for guitar. It doesn't have 2 inputs, so I can't plug the mic into it. Is that better? Somebody let me know. Come on, man. There's 15 of you guys. Somebody's got to have a question or some kind of topic for me. Otherwise, I'm going to bounce and work on my blog for my Substack. I'm almost done. Somebody's got to have something. By the way, we're still booking for retreat events. So we have one room for a couple or a single person for July for the solar maximum event. That's going to be not really focused on San Pedro. That'll be the culmination of it, the high altitude San Pedro ceremony at the end. But there'll be lots of adventures. So if you're interested in that, send me an email. And then I think we're going to do September for the jungle. We had to reschedule it because of my surgeries and whatnot. But that's going to be epic. Manu is the most pristine, except for like deep shit. I mean, there are places where no one goes. But as far as like easily accessible jungle, everything is there. The 31 tribes, jaguar, anaconda, tapir, parrots, monkeys, everything's intact, more or less. So super stoked about that. And that one is pretty open because we're just re-announcing it. And luckily, the people that had already booked did not mind rescheduling. So wonderful. And that one is going to be like more focused on ayahuasca and less of an adventure. July is more like an adventure kind of retreat. We'll go to ruins and we'll go into the city sometimes just to have fun and eat stuff. Whereas September is going to be like isolated medicine. That's it. Do I believe in ancestral guilt? I don't have to believe in it. It's just a fact. Ancestral trauma is a fact. If you guys haven't read Eighth Circuit Ascension, I just did an interview with the authors a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of good information about this kind of thing in there, but it's not even just trauma. Geneticists tell us that we can actually access specific memories from our ancestors in our DNA. And I think that beyond that, we can access information from just the universal mind in the same way. But for sure, we carry traumas and guilt and whatever from our ancestors. Healing the lineage is definitely a real thing. I came from extremely insane, abusive, kind of not well-educated parents, and it's like whatever happened to them stops with me because I'm not doing it to my son, and that's kind of the point of ayahuasca, and at least for most modern people, the boomer generation is estimated to be like 40% full-blown narcissists and 70% of them have narcissistic traits, which means that Generation X is it's very common to be borderline personality because that's the consequence of being raised by narcs, So we have to turn the tide with all of that stuff. And awakening is the key to that, but it's not just as simple as like spiritual insight or whatever. I think it's really important to avail yourself of every medium that you can to inform yourself in terms of psychology and techniques of self-analysis, mindfulness practices. It's not just as simple as just like taking psychedelics and fixing yourself. Even with a good shaman, you have to pick up the mantle. Is that the word? And diligently do the work. You have to really intend to transmute these forces. And one of the best things about all that is that it is sort of a key to forgiveness of your parents and their ancestors, because fuel is death and darkness and negativity. You burn fossil fuels. Most positive works that are done in the world are driven by hatred of evil and suffering. You know what I mean? Things beget their opposites. And so when you realize, like for myself, I wouldn't have all these talents that have kept me from having to be a wage slave if I didn't have all this damage done to me that I had to figure out how to fix so I can help other people. So if you are aware of the possibility of transmutation, then all of this damage, all of these things that you're carrying are gifts from your ancestors. Because it's like when you split an atom and you have this nuclear energy, like we associate that with, kindling the same light or same energy that lights the stars on our enemies, but it doesn't have to be a bad force. It's not fundamentally anything. It's just how you use it. But so all those little packets of ancestral trauma that we have are potentially a tremendous source of fuel for our ascension and liberation. You can use that atomic energy to burn the tether of the overseer and become your own Prometheus. Pussifer fans know. All right. Anybody got anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to go over to Substack, finish my blog. But that's the wonderful thing about it. Really all of the evil in the world is just fuel for good. And it's unfortunate in a way that things are constructed that way, but they had to be. The laws are not just because they are his laws because they are just. Meaning that the universe is predicated along the lines that it is because it's the only way it could be done. That's really the big question, Some people call this the devil's bargain. It was either nothingness and perfection for all of eternity, or duality with this set of rules and this set of laws, and so therefore, for every bit of pleasure, it is compensated with pain and suffering. So was it worth it? It's not a matter of crime and punishment, like a lot of people, the Christians tried to spin it that way, the Christian church. Hey, there's a jumping spider. It's a little bit too fast for my comfort, man. I wish it would slow down a little bit. Let's see. All good. You kids be safe. Can I travel? It depends on where and why, but you can send me an email if you have something in mind. Yeah, we can. All right, guys. I can see people dropping off, so I'm going to go ahead and bounce out myself. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again tomorrow, maybe. Can I sing? Yeah, I do music on this channel. I haven't been able to work out the bugs in my interface. So sometimes it's like really out of sync. Like my guitar is not synced with the backing tracks and the vocals will be too hot and stuff. So it can be a bit of a mess. Sometimes it's good. Anyways, you can check those streams. I'll do another one on Saturday. So follow me, hit the bell thing so you know when I go live, and I'll do music on Saturday night. So cheers, guys. Good night.